Well, good morning and welcome to the Polk County School Board's work session on this fine day. Just looking out, just trying to see all those faces out there. Good to see all the smiles. We will now call the work session for February 11th, 2025 to order. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, especially our staff. I see you lined up back there in the back as well. Thanks for being accessible and available to us. We are humbled to serve alongside you and the most highly educated workforce in the nation and dedicated workforce as well. So thank you for what you do. in serving our students. I would like to start by reading our Who Are We statement, and it goes like this. We are the Polk County Leadership Governance Team. If we were to pick one phrase to define us, it would be student-centered, because when we come together to work, we lean on our diverse backgrounds and our experiences to ensure that our decisions are focused on providing a high-quality education for all students. The four most important things to our governance team are: 1, operating with integrity; 2, respecting our students, staff, families, and each other; 3, establishing a culture where stakeholders, they feel valued, they're supported, and have opportunities for personal and professional growth; and 4, supporting an approach of continuous improvement to ensure student outcomes. Collectively, we need to work on behalf of the children, the students we serve, and we're going to find these avenues of agreement so that we can govern the district in an effective manner. There's no acceptable alternative to that. We will always collaborate in a respectful manner in order to enhance opportunities for every student and staff member. We will not disparage others. Our students will thrive because when we remain committed to supporting the whole child, that's going to happen. So we hope to engage and empower our students and stakeholders to create this community of lifelong learners. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Superintendent Hyde to lead us in our work session today. Superintendent?
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board, members of staff, community members, thanks for being here. First two items before us today belong to Ms. Leanne Bennett from Career Tech Ed and Workforce Development. So, Ms. Bennett, would you please update the board on these two grants? Just a reminder, Mr. Keys, due to your newness, any certain grants come before the board due to the monetary value or the specificity of the topic. I make sure for transparency purposes we bring those, and that was a request of the board in the past.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have, first up, the Equipment Upgrade and Modernization Grant, EUM. It is allocated at $222,570. The funds will benefit the post-secondary programs at Travis and Ridge Technical Colleges for their diesel programs. We will be purchasing a diesel console link engine trainer to upgrade that program at $111,000 for each school. Does anybody have any questions about that grant? The second grant is our Sorry,
I just had a question on, have we worked with business partners to make sure whatever we're purchasing is the current industry standard?
I believe so in this instance,
Awesome.
yes. And I'm sure we reach out
Thank you.
as needed.
Yeah, thank you, Superintendent. Yeah, I actually appreciate the connection that's noted in that document. I think it references Strategic Plan Initiative number 3 and the idea of engaging with our stakeholders. And you actually do have a list of those community partners that are listed. That's a part of that advisory council that gave some feedback on this initiative. So I was just curious if we have other stakeholders that have an interest in maybe taking part in the advisory process to speak into these programs and initiatives, how could they take part in that?
They could reach out to our office, or they could reach out directly to the directors at the technical colleges. The technical colleges have advisory meetings twice a year for each of their programs, so they would be able to link them at least twice a year, some more. They would be able to link them into the appropriate program pathway.
Great. No, I'm excited about this one. And the diesel program, it's always fun to shake the hands of our students that have finished that program, and obviously a high need in our community as well. And just this week, I was at the GMF Steel initiative, and I mean, that was incredible that we had so many students actually on their grounds taking part in that, to see the high technology that's connected to steel manufacturing was incredible. So I've just always been a long advocate that we need to enhance our technical spaces, with facilities and more capital attention. So thank you for bringing this one forward.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay. The second grant, Workforce Development Capitalization Incentive Grant, or the CAP grant as it's referred to. The original allocation is for $1,048,342. $587,000 of those funds will go to Lake Wells Charter School. Our allocation will be used to enhance animal science and agri-technology programs through the district through capitalization supplies and non-capitalization equipment purchases. The $587,000 will support Lake Welch Charter and their CTE programs. It touches all of their programs, but I don't have the list in front of me. Does anybody have any questions?
Seeing no questions. Thank you, Ms.
All right.
Bennett. Oh,
Thank you very much. Oh,
hang on. Dr. Allen.
I know, it's just a quick one. So the specific program is around animal sciences, right? Because I saw that
animal science and agri-technology.
in agritech. Okay, very cool. And I think there were 14, we're expanding 14 programs, and then there was 2 new ones in that list. But yeah, all right, very good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you, Ms. Bennett. Next item up in the workshop, I'll bring Principal Brayton from Davenport School of the Arts to the podium. She's here to request a naming approval. Mr. Keys, this falls under your area. Board members, please know that all documentation has been submitted in accordance with board policy.
Good morning. Just wanted to share a little bit about Brian Keir. We're looking at naming the music building after him. It would be called the Brian E. Keir Music Building. Brian Keir was the principal at Davenport Elementary from 1998 to 2000. At the time, it was a failing school. He then pushed forward with it becoming an art school, Davenport School of the Arts, in 2000. He was the principal from 2000 to 2018. He was an advocate for the arts. He believed in developing the entire child. He sought kids out that struggled with academics and/or behaviors and introduced them to a specific arts area or areas until they found the one they loved and felt success with. We never had to guess where he was if we were looking around campus and we were like, gosh, where did Brian go? We always knew when he returned hours later, he was either sitting in art classes, rehearsals, on arts trips, or performances. It's been an honor to work for him at DSA and be on his administrative team from 2007 to 2018. Since he retired, he's been a principal mentor to myself and my team. His leadership has created a creative and positive climate and culture that is everlasting at Davenport School of the Arts. The success of DSA culturally and academically is not a coincidence. Brian Keir was a foundation setter and created a place where staff loves to come to work, where students look forward to coming to school, where parents want to volunteer because they love being on our campus. And where Oprah once said, if you can get paid for doing what you truly love, every paycheck is a bonus. Mr. Keir made me and many others feel like every paycheck was a bonus. He set up the administrative career for me 17 years ago where I could learn and grow as a leader. He is loved, honored, and admired by so many parents, students, staff, and community members. We, the DSA family, are better because of him. He has left a legacy at Davenport School of the Arts and in my heart personally that will carry on forever. We want to honor him for paving the way for us. We are actually reaping the benefits of the foundation that he laid many years ago with culture, academics, and the arts. We are planning a dedication ceremony for him once the approval goes through, and if it goes through, for April 25th. It's opening night of Annie Jr. That was the first production he did the first year he was principal at Davenport School of the Arts. He does not know about this. This will be a surprise to him. He thinks he's coming to honor people who helped pave the way, but in reality, it's going to be a dedication reception for him. We are actually flying in some past students who don't even live in the state anymore, who are planning to sing and perform at this dedication. Thank you.
Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you.
She beat you to the punch, Mr. Keys.
Sorry. Do you want to go first? It is your school. Okay. Thank you so much. This is truly deserved, just being able to watch him as a leader and what you've done to take over in his footsteps. I'm thrilled to be able to support this. She said it's a surprise. Is this video going to be on YouTube? Okay.
It will.
Yeah.
So we're just going to shield him from that.
I assume somebody
Okay.
will.
Yeah,
Okay.
he's good.
Okay.
Yeah, he lives an hour and a half away, and
Okay,
he-
perfect.
as he says, his wife gives him a honey to-do list every day, and this won't be part of it. His family does know.
Perfect. Okay. Just wanted to
Thank
make
you.
sure. Thank you.
Actually, I was going to say if somehow they found a way to keep a secret in Polk County, I'd be in there. Mr. Keys.
That was actually my first concern. I'm like, yeah, it's a secret, and here we are. No, but just to chime in, being able to experience that culture early on. Now my daughters are both in 7th grade and 2nd grade at DSA, and whenever Mr. Kier arrives on campus for these shows and presentations, he's very well organized, and everybody gets excited about it. And when I was asked to consider, coming behind this initiative, I thought, absolutely. And even as much so as a leader, everybody would tell you that he would say, no, that's not necessary, please don't. And I think that's even more reason to say we need to honor him in this. And the culture there is absolutely fabulous, and I feel privileged as a parent, having my daughters attend there, and it does create this type of excitement when you have an art-centered education. The kids, they look forward to going there every day. And especially my daughters, it's something always new, and there's an adventure, and they've gotten so much out of it, at least the theater program, my two girls. So definitely in support of this, and can't wait to honor Mr. Kier that night.
Ms. Fields.
Thank you. Good morning. Very appropriate, and I am very honored to be a part of the approval. Brian was an amazing man, and when I think of Davenport School of the Arts, immediately I think of him with his shades on. Very cool, calm and collect, and very committed to the community and to the school. So thank you for bringing this forward for us to consider.
Principal Brayton, there are no further questions or comments. Thank you so much for bringing your item forward.
Thank you.
We will do our best to keep it a secret. Next item, board members. Board members, you may recall about 18 months ago, we began a discussion about pre-K expansion, and at that time, there was a question in particular about, what options existed for the northeast or the northern portion of our school district. At the time, I had become aware of a pre-K setting on the campus of McLaughlin Middle High, excuse me, that had been vacated and had been closed by the previous early childhood learning administration. So we've been exploring opportunities for that building. Initially, we had an external partner that had shown an interest in potentially converting that to a workforce career tech ed location, but that never manifested and never came to fruition. So again, knowing the demand, and many of you know that I serve on the Early Learning Coalition's board, and so we know what the waiting list is across the county. We also realize, as you all do, we're very familiar with the fact that early intervention and early identification with our students is incredibly important. The promise and the benefits that our students derive from an early childhood experience and an early childhood learning experience are well documented. It assists with early learning development and brain development. It assists with social and emotional growth. It definitely assists with school readiness, especially kindergarten readiness. It will assist us overall with closing the achievement gap, and the research supports that these students will have long-term academic success. As I pointed out, for the academic performance, the research supports that students will that pre-K and early childhood education will result in higher test scores, better kindergarten readiness, as I shared, long-term educational outcomes resulting in higher graduation rates, lower grade retention, and the social emotional benefits is better behavioral outcomes and lower special education placement. In this case in particular for early childhood, there's a growing body of research that basically supports the fact that students who are identified early enough with dyslexia or dysgraphia can be supported and can ultimately overcome those disabilities through proper supports and learning the different skills and tools that they need to utilize on any given day. Just to give you a little bit more background on the site itself. I don't have the built date yet. Mr. Fix was going to provide that for me, and I believe he may have sent it to me, and I wasn't able to update the slide. It does feature 5 classrooms, which do have restrooms incorporated with them. There are additionally 2 what we call larger gang restrooms in the hallways. It does have a main office, has a clinic, has fenced play areas, has independent entrance and driveway. It's on the side of the campus, and it also has a lounge and planning room for staff. It was last utilized prior to the 2020 school year. More than likely due to COVID, it was last utilized in the 2018-2019 school year, but I'll confirm that date for you. The facility status itself, the site was evaluated by several departments at the beginning of the school year. In preparation of reopening that site, I had our IT department, I had our building grounds maintenance department go out, evaluate the site. I had Mr. Davis participate in this, and I'll explain each of those here in a moment. From the IT network perspective, Ms. Pasco's team went out and inspected the rooms, inspected the front office to ensure or to determine after 7 years what upgrades, if any, would have to be supported in order to make that a functional campus again. So they inspected the intercoms, wireless connectivity, camera systems, and other related areas. Those things have been addressed or are in the process of being addressed. Maintenance inspected the roof, the building, the water fountains, restrooms, and exterior areas. Custodial is going in to strip and wax the floors. It is, again, because it's been largely underutilized, and for the most part, it's been utilized as a storage area for various departments and programs over the years. So there's equipment there. This is where Mr. Davis and his amazing team come into play, because they are beginning the process of relocating that to our warehouse. Mr. Davis and his team also play a vital role in this effort, because there is available kindergarten or pre-K furniture available in our warehouse. So anything that's not there, obviously, a potential partner would supplement coming in. For background, we discussed this about 18 months ago, maybe 20 months ago is when the initial conversation began. And it began at the same time that we were discussing the fact that the Bezos Foundation was looking to partner with us at Oscar J. Pope, an underutilized facility where they would provide year-round Montessori pre-K, which ultimately benefits us because those students are likely to stay there and be served within that school setting as they matriculate through their lower grade levels. The district has since collaborated with Dr. Ryder, president for Connect Ed, formerly Lakeland Leads, to identify potential high-quality providers as identified by the Early Learning Coalition, and they identify high-quality providers based upon the following criterion. They utilize a scoring rubric. The organization's sustainability, their financial stability is also brought into question and evaluated and reviewed, and their organization's overall reputation. Based off that, the district currently has 3 providers who have met the criteria and have demonstrated an interest in partnering with Polk County Public Schools. Partners will be vetted with the ELC, Connect Ed, and district staff to determine which provider we would like to partner with. At the next meeting, the board will be provided with the rubrics and questions for each provider, and once approved, we will proceed with the process of vetting and identifying a potential partner. Board members, please note you were already provided with copies of the draft copies of the rubric and the questions in the attachments to the board docs. And that concludes my presentation on this pre-K initiative. I'll open it to any questions. I see Mr. Sharpless.
First, just want to say that I am a little disappointed that the CTE option did not come to fruition. It's not our fault, but just overall, I just want to make sure that's on the record that I'm disappointed. However, very excited that we have a need, and I mean, I drive past that building many times, almost daily, and I know there's a need in Southeast Polk County for more VPK options and early learning options, because I live in that community. And so that's what that building used to be used for. I think it makes complete sense to use it for that. So thank you for pursuing this option. Like I said, I am disappointed that the CTE option did not come to fruition. Again, not our fault. We have external partners. However, I am excited about the opportunity for additional seats in Southeast Polk for early learning, because it is vital for our area.
Let me give you a little bit of a ray of sunshine there on the Career Tech Ed side, because one of the expectations, regardless of which partner is selected, is that they must collaborate with McLaughlin to provide opportunities for those students who are on the early education pathways to participate, come over, do internships and shared experiences with both our students and the staff who are certified on that campus. So that is an expectation.
Okay, so we'll have an early learning career academy at McLaughlin then?
Education Early Learning Academy.
Okay,
yes,
perfect. And then that could potentially lead towards industry certifications for their early learning. So that's always a plus. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thought you'd be happy with that.
I am.
Ms. Miller.
Thank you for the update. This building was utilized in 2019, and it was doing much of both. It had a transition class in it as well as a pre-K. we had transition students, it might have been 2 or 3, very few, that were able to go over to the pre-K and work on similar workforce certifications. So I just want to make sure those students are also included when we start talking about that opportunity, because there's such limited transition opportunities, or we want to make sure there's a variety of options for students in that area. And so I'd like to talk about that. We could do it at a later date on, if it's not McLaughlin, would we open that to other students in the area for that similar certification? Because that's what we were doing before that facility closed.
Happy to discuss that at a later date. Mr. Keys.
I apologize as I'm coming into this kind of on the backside. And while I echo, the concerns that there is a need for this, and try not to put our area on a pedestal, but Northeast Polk County is probably the most rapid of those. I'm wondering, was there not another facility identified on the northeast side of the county, an asset we already had to utilize for that? And I'm not trying to push anything, but I think of the old grammar building right next to Daniel Jenkins Academy that's kind of sit there. I know it's an older building, a very old building, and it probably would need a lot of work going to that. But I think of facilities like that to where we could potentially plug in. I mean, the old, I call it the old clay cut building, but the old grammar building next there, it pains me every time I drive by to say that's sitting there, not utilized, and it's almost in disrepair, it seems like. So, whereas there's a need all across the county for early childhood education, which I am definitely in support of. But I think even more so selfishly, if I can say selfishly, in the northeast side where the growth is just absolutely rampant. And I know we had a problem when my daughter was going into there to finding viable options. So I'm curious about that. Are there any more assets in Northeast Polk that have been identified?
Your predecessor would push on the same issue and ask questions. Unfortunately, I have to give you the same answer. The difference between that area and some of our other areas may have declining or have had enrollment that shifted. And so there are some available spaces in some of those buildings, or a building like this existed and was not being utilized or was underutilized. Unfortunately, in the Northeast, we don't have any such facility, and quite honestly, we're building as fast as we can to keep pace with that growth. However, that does not mean, and you'll be pleased to know, that our elementary prototype does include a dedicated pre-K early learning component to it, like we constructed at Willow Oak. So in the future, new elementary schools would have those facilities. It's actually a separate building, which is a good thing. They have their own entrance, and they have their own loop on the parking lot, which is how it's been designed at Willow Oak. Unfortunately, the clay cut building is not a viable option for us. I have had staff evaluate that building probably a minimum of 3 times since I've been here. I'm the last person that wants to forfeit an existing building because I know how hard it is to get revenue to build another one. So if we can renovate, that's always a good idea. But that building is beyond economical repair. It's what we call BER. And so right now, we're actually in the process of negotiating a real estate sale of that property.
Okay.
The district took that initiative probably about 6-7 months ago because that property is just not a viable property for expansion, unfortunately. We did consider that property. If not for academic expansion or programmatic expansion, we did evaluate that property potentially as an additional work site to house some of our fleet vehicles and things of that nature. But again, the parking lot is not conducive to doing so. And so at the time, we have basically put it out to market, and we have an interested party at this time.
I appreciate that, Superintendent.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
But we will keep the Northeast in our plans for pre-K expansion.
Thank you.
Dr. Allen?
Thank you, Superintendent. Yeah, the VPK initiative is definitely a high-need area for us. I was curious, how would you compare this model to the Oscar J expansion, and where we're at in that process and how that came together? So, from a comparison standpoint.
Well, that'll have to be evaluated when we do the formal evaluation of each proposal, which has been submitted at this point.
Yeah.
So none are year-round at this time. However, 2 of the providers have indicated an interest in year-round support because families still have to work even during the summer months. So I think the opportunity will present itself for that to take place. Mm-hmm. It is not a Montessori-based. None of the providers have indicated a programmatic specificity there.
That's good to know.
Of Montessori. So.
Are we still, speaking of Oscar J and the Bezos, are we still targeting fall 25 for launch?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And if I recall, there were about 300 seats capacity for that one. I can't remember exactly. I think it was 300. So I don't know. My question is, what's your anticipated capacity for this?
Well, these are 5 very large classrooms. When you look at fish numbers in particular, the square footage of each one of those classrooms, almost all 3 of the current providers have inquired as to can they flex those room spaces. So there are partitions. The only requirement that we've stipulated to them is that no one can touch the facility without our team providing approval of any plans or engineering designs and specs, and that everything has to be reversible. So they can put up, for example, a new wall and run electrical and run IT connections and things like that, but it would be a temporary wall. It would not be a load-bearing wall that would basically change the overall possibilities of utilization for that building in the future.
Yeah. I think it's a good partnership. It's good to see the long-term viability as a part of that rubric because, we all know that it's definitely a challenge and a struggle to continue VPK programs, and we've seen that. So, yeah, definitely I think it's a good partnership possibility. Mm-hmm.
Ms. Fields?
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. I think this is an excellent initiative, and I know there's a great need in the McLaughlin community. So I have a couple of questions. Do we have any ideas of how many children will be served? And will we be providing preference, that might not be the correct word to use, but making sure that the kids in the community that have the greatest need, that they're considered in a different fashion than someone maybe not so?
Yes, ma'am. And those things will be stipulated when I'm going to address your second question, if I may first. That will be stipulated in a final contract that's negotiated. In fact, we have shown an interest in potentially securing seats or a percentage of the seats for staff, for our own employees, and there would be a lottery system for them to apply for those seats. There's a benefit to both parties. If you think about the fact that we would maintain the facility as we currently do, it removes all the capital expenditures from that organization's cost budget line item, allowing them to invest in additional staff. So we expect, and this gets to your first question, which is the total number of students. If the classrooms remain unchanged, you're looking at anywhere from 80 to 90 students total. If some of those spaces are flexed and split in half, which they could be, then you could almost get to 120, 130 total students on that campus being served. There are 2 portables there as well that could be used for classroom spaces or office space. So we'll wait to see what that final number. But minimally, I think we're anticipating anywhere from 80 to 90 students on that campus as it currently sits.
That's amazing.
Yes, ma'am.
One of the other things that I want to say, and thank you for answering, I love the questions, and one of the things that I see that's resonating is diversity and cultural initiatives. So I think that's great that we're understanding that we have to make sure that we provide the training and we provide the resources for kids from all backgrounds, and not just racial, but the financial piece as well. So whoever did the questions, they did a great job on it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I admit I cheated a bit with the internet and some other tools that are available to us. And Ms. Miller, I was remiss. I should have pointed you back to if you look at the specificity of the questions, there is a section dedicated solely to students with disabilities or exceptionalities to ensure that they will be adequately served and included in that cohort group. Ms. Wyatt.
Thank you. I'm always thrilled to hear about more pre-K options because I don't know if any of you have looked for pre-K options recently, but they are not abundant. So I'm sure they've probably gotten slightly better since you were looking, Travis, but not much. So I'm thrilled to hear more options coming. One of the questions that was asked talked a little bit about spaces. Could we get a list of our spaces that are currently not being used, just for our knowledge and kind of what the status is of each of them? Are they, they haven't been used in their storage and it would take millions of dollars for them to be used again, or they're just where that underutilization is?
Absolutely happy to provide that for you. We can give you a total school list and building list. For schools, we'll also give you the occupancy or utilization report. I typically send that out to you guys every year. I don't believe I've done it for this year. And we always look at, like, Tenor Rock was a great place to put 3DE because they were only at 52% utilization. And so it made a great deal of sense. At this point, Kingsford is the only remaining elementary school site that is not being utilized, or we don't have plans to utilize in the future. Lewis Woodbury right now is under renovation for their cafeteria, and that school will reopen. Ms. Fields and I had a recent meeting last Friday with their former mayor and still city commissioner to have a discussion, and I'm drafting a letter to be read at one of their city commission meetings. Additionally, I will be present at a future commission meeting to explain to the community what the options that I will be bringing before the board. I can't commit to anything for that site at this time, but I will ensure that we meet the commitments that we made when we initially consolidated those campuses. And the commitments that we made to that community were two things. Number one, make sure the building is utilized in the future. And number two, please don't rename the facility given its historical perspective within the community, or its historical importance within the community. So that's the only remaining facility. Clay Cut, as I said, is being sold, but we'll be happy to give you square footage on all of those other areas. Kingsford, we're currently in discussion with a party about potentially about assuming Kingsford, and I'll provide the board with an update. I believe we meet with that organization later this week with facilities and our architectural team and others.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Sharpless?
Just wanted to echo Mr. Key's your concern with the Northeast. I will say this: when we were discussing the new high school in that area, one option that Superintendent Hyde did mention was that there would be an early childhood academy potentially to help serve to alleviate some of that issue in Northeast. So hopefully that happens. I also want to echo, yes, Board Member Wyatt. I've recently been looking for pre-K options. I mean, my 1-year-old for half a year. My stepmom luckily works from home, and luckily she was able to watch them because it's how hard it was to find in the area. So it will definitely help. And 80 to 90 students, wow, that's going to be huge, potentially.
Potentially more.
Okay, that will be huge.
I'm not a big fan of the plan. I was hoping to take the portables out. I'm not a fan of utilizing portables for classroom spaces, especially for early learning, but we'll wait to see. And there's always the potential then for them to convert another one of the spaces. If they move their offices, for example, into the portables, then that flexes that lounge other area potentially for another classroom. But we'll wait to see what the architectural recommendations or requests are that come in to expand that space. That building, interestingly enough, much like the building yesterday at the ribbon cutting, is a very easy building for us to replicate. At about roughly $1.5 million to build roughly almost 2,200 square feet, that creates a great space and is something that we should be exploring at other sites for early learning expansion. Because again, it only benefits our kindergarten teachers and then those students because they're not starting at a disadvantage. And Polk County, unfortunately, has a very low participation rate in structured early learning programs. It's one of the reasons why our kindergarten readiness rate falls well below the state average each year. And so, Mr. Hutek and others have really had a focus on this and have really helped us with our initiatives in this regard, so we're very pleased. In fact, they provided us, as you may recall, grant funding to put mental health counselors in our early learning program areas, and so those positions are being advertised and will be interviewed and hired to provide those supports for early identification and support. So the demand is definitely there, and everyone understands, regardless of the economy of the day at the time. Early childhood care is incredibly expensive, and it's a huge impact on young families. So that's why I emphasized earlier that one of our initiatives or one of our requests with these groups is that we be able to do a set-aside for employees, and then we would have to have a lottery system to allow them to gain entry to that, with the understanding that that lottery would not be done on an annual basis unless a new seat becomes available, right? I'm not going to force somebody to pull their kid out of a program when, based off their age. It could be a 3-year-old that could be there for 2 more years. So obviously it would be predicated upon availability of space. But if successful, it would be a model that we could easily look to expand and replicate further. Ms. Miller?
Thanks. I'm glad that you mentioned diversity in the classroom with ability. And I think that's important because we obviously need more space for kids to be learning in an inclusive environment and being supported no matter what their learning needs look like. But I think I have already sent the email to remind us to have the conversation about offering a transition or employment site, and it doesn't have to be for students with disabilities. I think any student that's looking for certification in pre-K, it would be a great opportunity. That building, the history of that building, I think there are others that are similar to that. Ms. Fields may have more information. I understand at one time it was almost a behavioral unit. They've been used for a lot of things. If you haven't been, you should visit it. It's not an old building by any means. It's not large. You said maybe 2,200 square feet, but there is a lot of opportunity to use it. And I think pre-K, because of how it's set up, is probably a great option. So when we're getting a list of schools that you're going to talk about utilization, I also would like independent buildings, because I think I was on the board 3 years when I still would pull up to buildings to meet people I had no idea existed, like very small office buildings in the middle of different cities. So I would like to include not only schools, but our other facilities that are being used, if that's possible.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Seeing no further questions on that item. Again, this item will come back before the board on a recurring basis, and then I'll have further discussion with board members as to any questions that you may have. But I'd like to bring that back at the next workshop, and then we will, at the next workshop, I'll provide you with an update as to who's been selected to serve on the interview committee. If a board member has a particular interest in early learning, would like to sit on that committee, more than welcome to contact me, and I'd be happy to see what we can do to coordinate that and have you serve in that capacity. The next item for the board is the CFA expansion. I brought this to you previously. Excuse me, apparently that's not the next one. The next one that's on the board, on the screen up there in front of us, is Alta Vista and Scenic Terrace. So we find ourselves in a unique situation, board members, where Alta Vista is slated for a complete replacement school. The problem is the acreage for that facility is not conducive and will not support a phased renovation or the entire relocation of that building into portables while their main campus is rebuilt. We own no additional property in that immediate vicinity that could be used. Additionally, if we did, that would require an additional investment into infrastructure to house portables and structure a parking lot and a driveway and all those things. So the team came to me and asked me initially, Mr. Hyde, could I support, and would the board support the possibility of using Scenic Terrace again as a flex site? And I said no. Based off the comments from the board and our previous discussions about Scenic Terrace, I said no, we need to find another alternative. They came back with this proposal, and I do support this. The two schools are less than 1.5 miles, I believe, from each other. I'm looking at the back. In fact, they might be significantly closer than that. It's closer to 1 mile, the distance between the two. So the recommendation that I will bring before the board at the next board meeting, and then again, based off board approval, I'll provide you at the next workshop with a timeline for community meetings, staff meetings, and all of those things, but I need to get some initial responses from you here today, just so I have an understanding of what the board's interests may be. And there's no vote today, to be clear, but you can tell me via consensus as to whether or not you support our continued movement in this direction. So the recommendation from staff is that we go ahead and we convert Scenic Terrace, move Alta Vista permanently to the Scenic Terrace location. It now becomes Alta Vista, but we allow Alta Vista to now expand into a K-8 facility. As we've done with other schools that have expanded into K-8, it would be a rolling growth or rolling enhancement, meaning for Alta Vista, they would move there. Outgoing fifth graders, those parents would have the choice to stay there for sixth grade next year, and then seventh grade would roll up, eighth grade would roll up. It does serve the purpose of what Scenic Terrace was built for, because it does pull students out of the overall enrollment of Boone Middle School, which was the intent there, was to provide relief for the enrollment there. And so it does serve two purposes. The Alta Vista site would still be demolished and would still, what we're recommending is we still construct a new site there based off the growth in the area and provide additional relief to other locations and other schools that are growing quickly and reaching overall capacity. This may also assist us with some of those other sites that by addressing their enrollment growth and providing additional flex space with a new campus, that we would be able to start to reduce some of our costs associated with portables on those other sites. because, as you know, we end up purchasing or leasing a large number of portables, and so that adds to our capital expenditures, and it's a good way for us to be more proactive in saving our money moving forward. Mr. Keys.
Yeah, I will tell you that absolutely. I mean, I drive by Alta Vista at least 3 times a day, and that is one of those situations where we are landlocked there. We don't have a lot of place to expand. So, you know, looking through this and haven't had the time, you know, there's not a lot of viable options in the area, obviously, with the overcrowding of some of those facilities. And, you know, one of the first things that comes to mind for me on those is the traffic in and out of, especially if you consider trying to utilize some of the facilities that are already in your capacity, such as Eastside. I mean, that traffic is a nightmare as well. Scenic Terrace, I would tell you at the beginning, living, you know, within a couple miles from that, at first it was kind of hard to navigate that area with construction of residences going in all around that facility, and even as much so as that I purposely avoid 1790 or Highway 17 in that area now, because it seems like that road is frequently shut down to add a lane to one of these communities or facilities going in around there. So I will tell you, as it's presented in the kind of the overview, I'm in support of that, because I think that the need is there, and I'm very pleased to hear that the proposal for the Alta Vista site is a K8, and I'm a big fan of that model. So, you know, as it's presented so far, I'm looking forward to seeing more information on it, and initially would be in support of this.
Thank you. Ms. Wyatt?
Thank you. I concur with everything that Mr. Keith said. My question is, obviously, because they're so close, once Scenic Terrace is zoned, many of those Alta Vista students may end up zoned to Scenic Terrace. When they go back, will they have the option of going back to Alta Vista or staying at Scenic Terrace? What would the plan look like? You know, right now with Elbert, it's very clear that Elbert's all going back because none of them would be zoned to Scenic Terrace, but it would look a little bit different, I would guess, after Alta Vista.
Well, here's the thing. Normally, I would put staff on the spot, but Mr. McLemore just returned from being out of the office for a week for personal reasons, and congratulations, sir, again. Mr. Fix, are you prepared to address that? Please. Okay.
So the thought would be that what we call Scenic Terrace, what we call Alta Vista today, we would go back, rebuild that eventually, because that area is still growing. We would open it up as its own new school. And more than likely, we'd have to redo the attendance zones. Just off the top of my head, I'm foreseeing that the main road could be the division line between the two. And in fact, the way the attendance boundary is right now, that would make a good division line. Those on the east, those on the west side would go to the new Alta Vista, and then those on the east side would remain at this, what we call Scenic Terrace facility today.
Okay.
We would, and unfortunately, I didn't have another answer for you, because we would have to bring this before the attendance boundary committee to have them work with some, we'll draft some proposals, but to bring in time for the next board meeting. But if the ABC committee doesn't meet between now and then, understand that those are draft proposals based off staff recommendations and have not been vetted through the ABC committee. But I think we can better address your question that way.
And I think, and I don't necessarily need an answer today, I think I may have not phrased my question well. Will they have, if they're zoned, so say they're moving to Scenic Terrace for a year, but then they're going to be zoned back to Alta Vista, do they have the option to stay at Scenic Terrace, or will they have have to go back and vice versa? No. If they were with the Alta Vista population but are now being zoned to Scenic Terrace, even though they've been in that building for a year, would they have the option, like many do if we build a new school and create a new zone when they're in 3rd or 4th grade, could they go back to Alta Vista and finish with their friends and classmates that they've been with?
No, we would maintain the interest that the board has demonstrated and the district has followed over the last 4 years. We don't do forced movement. Okay. A family can decide to go ahead and maintain their enrollment at a facility even during an attendance boundary change or a zoning change, so long as certain conditions are met. The student must continue to arrive at school on time, can't have any excessive disciplinary infractions, must be successful academically, those types of things. It's typically a contract that we put in place between us and the family. But no, ma'am, we would not force students to matriculate back and forth. The only place where it tends to get a little bit funny is, let's assume you have a third grader, but next year you have an incoming kindergartner. When you want your third grader to finish out at Scenic Terrace rather than coming back to Alta Vista, ordinarily my recommendation would be the kindergarten go to their zone site rather than creating that, because then now you're just extending the duration for that family. So, but we can talk about that, but that has been our policy to date.
My question is, and I guess my concern is more, my fourth graders at Alta Vista, they complete a year at Alta Vista, but in the Scenic Terrace building, they're still zoned Alta Vista. They're going to be at Scenic Terrace. We keep calling it Scenic Terrace. That's not officially the name. But in that, they're going back there for middle school. Do they have to go back to Alta Vista for fifth grade, or could they stay?
No, and I'm sorry if I didn't answer that clearly. No, ma'am. We don't do forced movement. So that student will be allowed to finish out through the grade levels supported by that school.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Also,
Sorry. Give me 1 second. Ms. White.
the new Alta Vista will not be burnt yellow, correct? Please.
Mr. Fix, you heard that, right?
Begging.
School colors have come in question of late, so if we could make sure that the board sees a color palette before we make final selections next time. Recognizing Ms. Field. Go ahead, Mr. All right.
Oh, Mr.
Ms. Fields.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. I would be very interested in on the timeline for the meetings with the parents and the community. I think that's going to be very important. I think the message that we provide, the information that we provide is going to be critical. And I think we need to focus on maybe a frequently asked question, some of the questions that Ms. White referenced, just so that the community can know exactly what's going to happen, because change is sometimes very difficult.
Yes, ma'am.
And we want to make sure that everyone has information that they need in order to make an intelligent decision.
Absolutely. Yes, ma'am. And again, the board can have, we do have the luxury of not requiring sixth grade to matriculate there next year. It could always grow into the subsequent year, but go ahead and let them get settled into the building as an elementary setting, and that gives them additional time to hire, recruit, and place. We could do our FF&E placement if any is remaining at that time. So at least we have an option to utilize that building to address the capacity issues at Moon, and it does allow us to serve the Alta Vista community, give them a new location, and then rebuild that site to serve a growing population still within the community. Dr. Allen.
I mean, I just have a little concern on this, you know, so I'll still be in information gathering along the way. I mean, the board just approved the expansion of portables, which I've opposed, and I did oppose to put, you know, portables at Boone. And then, you know, I don't know where we're at with our, you know, master. We're like doing patchwork in regards to redistricting in a sense. So I don't know, we're apparently supposed to be discussing, right, with our high school redistricting, and then next year, middle school, elementary. So, you know, and again, going back to our efficiency audit, I mean, that was the best cost savings we can find as a district. So I have concern that we're just sort of patchworking along the way and not being very efficient. But that's just my opinion. So I'll look for more information along the way.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fix. Thank you, staff. Next item before the board is the retreat update. Board members, you were provided with options for the retreat based off the limited number of you that could participate in full-day events. I then came back to you, as we discussed in our last board meeting, and I surveyed you again based off your availability for morning and afternoon meetings. I also surveyed you based off of the topics, the prioritization of the topics to be discussed during these first board retreat dates. Board members, as you recall, the purpose behind our retreats is to allow us an opportunity to plan, review data, come up with new initiatives, identify best ways for us to support or modify the existing strategic plan, because it will be changing or sunsetting at the end of the next school year. That takes us into our fourth year. We can reestablish goals and expectations for the measurable metrics for student outcomes. But again, looking at each one of the 5 goal areas, is the board still satisfied with the goal areas? Do they comprehensively address the majority of our needs? And then again, what initiatives are underneath those? I will give the staff an incredible amount of credit. The document that you will receive soon provides a very comprehensive study, including KIPs for all of our initiatives to date. I think you'll be very pleased to see the outcomes there, and then that ultimately that will be published to our district website, and that will be the model that we use moving forward. But based off of your responses, right now, our tentative board dates, I've not heard anything from board members to date that these dates are in conflict, because again, I did take into consideration your schedules and your conflicts. There are several of dates that are on here where we may be missing at least one board member. But we will have a consensus. As promised to the board, there's no vote that takes place at these meetings. It's simply a discussion. And before any action is taken to modify the strategic plan, it will come back before the entire school board at a subsequent workshop before being adopted. And we have the opportunity to have plenty of discussion or to hear your additional input if you were unable to make one of these sessions. And again, want to make sure that you know that your voice is included and heard within these. So our first meeting right now is scheduled for February 24th from 9 a.m. to noon. March 11th, we'll meet from 9 a.m. to noon. March 10th, 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And April 30th from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. The topics are listed here for the board members. They are, again, on strategic planning, governance and roles, student achievement, budget and resource allocation, school climate and culture, professional development, board dynamics and team building, crisis management and student or school safety, community engagement, and reflection and evaluation. And one of those, again, based off board feedback, the initial list was expanded to include your additional topics or interests that you shared with me. Based off your votes, here's how the topics came out by priority ranking. Strategic planning was ranked number 1. Student achievement was ranked 2nd. Budget and resource allocation was ranked 3rd. Governance and roles 4th. Human resources 5th. Community engagement 6th. School climate and culture 7th. Reflection and evaluations are 8th. Board dynamics and team building 9, and professional development was ranked last. It does not mean that these topics are not important. It just means that based off your interest and your perceptions, this is how you'd like to prioritize these. Please understand that given this is just the first 4 retreats, I have no interest, nor do you, into cramming 11 topics or 10 topics into 4 meetings. That's not the intent or the purpose. So essentially what I will now do is work with the chair to develop an agenda for each one of those meetings. You'll be provided that draft agenda. If we need to provide any additional revision to those agendas, happy to do so. But again, I want to make sure that each one of our sessions that we meet are productive and allow you to feel like you're having we're having a conversation, you have a voice in decisions that are coming out of these meetings, or recommendations, let me rephrase that are coming out of these meetings for our goals and initiatives moving forward. Again, it's incredibly important that your comments and your feedback and our collaboration reflect our values and our commitments moving forward as a school district. I have the utmost confidence that that will take place. Based off the agenda, and I will have to get approval on the agendas rather quickly, especially for the 24th, because I'll need to know what data you'd like to see related to the agenda topics included within here. At the same time, part of this conversation for board retreats was also about additional training for board members from the Florida School Board Association, and I'll continue to work on dates for that to take place. We have some additional retreat dates, and I'll work with the chair, Dr. Allen, to identify that once Ms. Messina and the Florida School Boards Association provides me with a list of their availability moving forward. So. Yeah. Mr. Sharpless.
I will not be at one of the ones based on the data I sent, but it's a half day, which is okay. And so I was curious, will these be recorded so I could review what was said during these, other than just seeing the agenda? Or how will I be able to go back and review these?
There will be at minimum a transcription of the meeting. Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'm not sure that there's a video recording. Depending on the location,
Okay.
I'm a little reluctant to commit staff to relocating equipment all the time. If the board meeting is held here, I'll discuss retreat locations with the chair and then give you some options as well. Okay. If we are someplace off-site, then the likelihood is we will use some type of transcription service or AI tool to capture what was said and what's done in the meeting.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Ms. Wyatt?
Thank you. Well, because the 24th is obviously before our next board meeting, I believe, will we have when will we have information on what that topic is? And I know strategic planning came in first, and that's really just you and your team. Should we assume it's that? Do you have any thoughts? I just want to make sure we know what we're going into before that meeting.
So based off that, we would be looking at our goals. If the board recalls last year's retreat, when we established the annual goals to determine whether or not we were showing the growth in each one of those areas, and then based off of what we saw this year, even though it's only 1 year of preliminary data, the board had said, and my commitment to the board was, if we saw that we committed to a 2% improvement in early literacy and we saw a 6% improvement, do we need to adjust our goal? And so I think that's the focus of the conversation. I think I'd also like to give the 3 new board members in particular who are not here for those initial conversations an opportunity to make sure that the metrics that we use to evaluate our overall academic improvements are reflective of their interests and needs as well. We moved away from a very high-level review of academic achievement, and now we drill down at demographic subgroups. But some data we have found may not necessarily be as pertinent to you or to us as we initially thought, because some of the data can be skewed. Industry certifications are a good example. AP attainment, we see an increase in the total number of AP classes changed, but is that reflective of one student being successful in 6 courses, or is that reflective of how many isolated specific individuals? So we may need to drill down into data a little bit more to make sure that when I'm providing that summary to you, it accurately reflects what your needs and your interests are. So that would be the intent there. I do not believe that will take more than the established timeline of half a day, and then we won't bleed into another topic. I think if we're done, we're done, because that creates a disadvantage to others who may or may not be at that meeting to go into another topic that, in particular, they may have a stronger interest in. So I would try to get you something by the end of this week, because I do need to share the agendas and reflect on that with our chair, and I'd like to get that to you as quickly as possible. And but again, with the focus on you being able to give me feedback, I can list for you what we intend to bring to the meeting. Is there something else you'd like to see? So.
Thank you. And more than anything, some of the topics in the top 5, I feel like I need to do a little bit of legwork just on being prepared to ask questions and making sure I have all my thoughts in one place. So it's helpful to know what's coming before we show up and
Absolutely.
start talking about
And if the
something.
board, there will be questions, guiding questions for each of these, much like what you saw with the early learning. So I've been working on those so that you can I think this gets to your point, right? When we talk about this topic, from my perspective, what am I looking for? And then you need to expand upon that and provide me direction, which is those are great, ideas, Mr. Hyde, but we want to focus. I'd like to see an additional focus here, and I'll take direction from the board.
Thank you.
But that way it'll help me make sure you have the research and the information that you need to feel like these are productive meetings. So having you sit there for 4 hours and listen to staff present is not going to be productive.
Thank you. My second question is on, you mentioned FSBA. My recollection from the last time we had these conversations was that we needed to get the topics first and that we would then look at different partners that could offer those services. I have some concerns that FSBA does not always feel like the most neutral party. So I would love to hear from my colleagues on whether that's the direction we want to go or if that's just the direction we're thinking. Thank you.
Ms. Fields?
I know that I'm not available on April the 10th. I've already told you that, so I'd appreciate that being noted. And I think that all of us need to be a part of the strategic planning. I think that's essential. And for me, all of these topics are critical, but student achievement is very important to me. So I would appreciate it if it were not scheduled on the 10th of April.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Was that the 11th, Ms. Fields? I had the 11th. I want to make sure. Oh, sorry, the 10th you said of April. Yes, ma'am. My apologies. Ms. Miller?
I'm just going on what Ms. Wyatt has said. In the last meeting where this was discussed, we talked about, for us board members who've sat through some of the FSBA trainings, we talked about, 1, the cost being presented publicly, 2, depending on what the subject matter is, there may be a local more of a local addition that could help us with some of it. I know in the past they were good with the overall of a kind of a higher view of what things look like as far as roles and such. But I think what was helpful to me is hearing from local people who know our county, who know our board makeup, who could interact. And I think as a board, we just need to discuss what's most important. But overall, the cost of what we're going to spend, I think, needs to be transparent to the community. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Keys?
I think, for me, if I'm going to chime in on it as part of training, if we bring in outside consulting to help facilitate subject matter, the only two things that I consider as subject matter experts, they have to be, obviously, that is a qualification, and two is cost. Those are the only two things I kind of consider on those. We don't want to be getting, obviously, information or advice from somebody who's not a subject matter expert, whether it be local or not. But I am in favor of looking at all options, all viable options when we consider consulting and training utilization.
Thank you, Mr. Keys. See no further comments or questions. Board members and Mr. Murphy, I'm going to lean on you and our chair. The conversation about FSBA is not a conversation to be had through the superintendent. That's not something that the superintendent partners with. If the board would like to explore other options, and I've had this conversation with individual board members for their training, what was recommended is board members do the research and come back and say, I'd rather than attending or participating with FSBA, I believe this fulfills the same expectation. This fulfills my professional obligations as an elected board member, and it also aligns with our strategic plan, and that you guys bring that back for discussion amongst yourselves to determine that. Each board member is given a budget. We've not typically included the dollars paid for FSBA in that budget. The chair and I have had some conversations about that. But if the board is not required as a collective whole to participate in FSBA. It can be an individual board member interest. There are some benefits. Each of you have acknowledged that. But if a board member would rather see their portion of the allocation that typically goes to FSBA be utilized in a different manner, I think it falls upon each board member to then justify that expenditure and how it aligns to your roles and responsibilities. That's from my perspective. I'll leave it with Mr. Murphy for any further discussion, but I think the board can bring this back for further discussion. You can either have that discussion today under old business or new business, or you're welcome to discuss it at the next board workshop. Happy to add it as an agenda item, but I believe it's probably one that's best facilitated by Mr. Murphy or others, and not through my chair. Ms. Miller.
I appreciate you taking into consideration that it's a board decision. But I think we've had this conversation a couple of times. And I think what happens is that we have board members who have been on long-term using certain professional development that was helpful, and then new board members finding other professional development. So I don't know if there's time in that retreat where you would like to speak about that. Our chair might have an input on that. Or if we could just discuss this at another work session, but there are some topics that I think are helpful. I think overall cost is a factor. I can tell you through my own research, last year we spent about $38,000 with FSBA. I know we have local leadership that has done similar trainings, and we need to talk about together as a board to see if it meets our expectations, all 7 of our expectations before they facilitate again. We've used them in the past, and I think what happens is we just run into the fact that some of us is just repeating the same things we've done, and that may be helpful, or it might be helpful to look at another perspective depending on what the subject matter is. Personally, I feel that if you're talking board budgets and things like that, it might be very helpful to hear from FSBA. If you're talking strategic Polk County leadership positions and things, or how we're moving through, it might be a local person. But I agree that it is not the decision of the superintendent. So if we need to schedule time, I'm requesting that we do that either at this retreat or the next work session to see what works for the majority of the board. Thank you.
Ms. Fields.
Thank you. I'd be interested in knowing the $38,000, where that stems from, because I know we haven't had master board training in years. So that would be very helpful for me. And I think that we need to have discussion, because I think the discussion needs to be honest, open, and frank. What is the issue with using the Florida School Board Association? Is it the money? Is it the presenters? Exactly what are the issues? And then is it going to be best for us to look at something related to a local resource, or depending on the subject matter? I don't think we've even seen any subject matters from FSBA as it relates to master board training in years. So I'm sure all that has changed. So I think that we need to have all that information for discussion, and then after that, we can determine whether or not we want to continue to use the Florida School Board Association, or if we want to go down a different road. But I think there's a lot of information that we need to have before we can make an intelligent decision, at least for me.
Ms. Wyatt?
Thank you. I think it's two separate things. So the Florida School Board Association memberships and what we've been paying is separate from what it would be additional to do a master board training or bring them in. Again, as Ms. Fields stated, I believe our school board, our FSBA contract for membership comes up in March. So I would like to request that at our board meeting in 2 weeks that we have during work session that on there for discussion, what it looks like if we renew as a full board, what it would look like if we renew as individual members, and what the cost would be for any master board training or any additional. It would be helpful to have a breakdown of what we've spent, where that $38,000 went last year. I know we've asked several times for numbers. I have yet to see the actual numbers, but if we can please have that on the work session for 2 weeks from now so that we can then make some educated decisions, that would be very helpful.
I will relay that request to the appropriate staff.
Thank you.
Mr. Sharpless.
Yeah, I definitely thought this was two different topics. And so what we have in front of us here with the topics that are being offered for our retreats, I thought those were, strategic planning, that's going to be, I would assume, handled by superintendent, your staff.
Correct.
Because that's our strategic plan. So the idea of professional membership and then also, this retreats, I think, are two different things to me.
Well, let me explain a little differently. So when we first started having discussion about retreats, the interest was master board training and some other things that FSBA typically provides, and we would build retreat dates into that because some of the FSBA, as Dr. Allen had shared previously, and I believe I shared at the last meeting when we talked about this, or maybe it was the meeting before, was that some of the FSBA training requires an entire day, whereas other training components may only require a half day. So we were trying to find an opportunity to blend so that you're not being asked to do additional workshops beyond what would be important to us as an organization. Knowing that workshops don't require a consensus, or don't require a quorum, you can attend that training. And so the intent was to basically incorporate those trainings and opportunities as needed within the workshop structure or within the retreat structure. So that's how it got a little bit confused. But there has been discussion amongst the board openly about FSBA and whether or not, and I think ultimately what it falls to is each board member wants to pursue their own avenue and path for professional and personal growth. Some want to do it through an established organization. Others may want to do it through other established organizations. Again, the only feedback I give the board, and I think Mr. Murphy and others would agree, is just ensure that whatever it is you want to pursue aligns with our district vision and mission, aligns with our overall strategic plan goal areas, and aligns with what you were elected to do in your performance of your duties. It's not this is why I was careful how I responded to Ms. Wyatt. It's not my role to tell the board what's an approvable professional development initiative. You're my bosses in that regard, right? I'm not yours. So I'll have staff assist you, but the board members will have to do their own research and come up with, rather than belonging to this professional organization, I'd like to belong to this one, and here's why I think it's of value. And as long as you can justify that, I don't know that there's an issue, because, again, you do each get budgeted for travel, for expenditures, things like that nature. Very few of you travel, and much to your credit. You're not, hopping on things to spend money to go to national conferences and things of that nature, because most of your work is done here in Florida. But there are opportunities for you. based off your individual interests. And I'm not picking on Mr. Sharpless, but I'm looking at him, so I'm going to say, you know, there may be a national conference that Ms. Bennett says, you know what, Mr. Sharpless, we'd like you to attend this because it's about workforce development, career tech ed. And each one of you has demonstrated sincere interest in certain topics. Dr. Anthony or other staff may reach out to Ms. Fields and say, you know what, there's a conference or a meeting on diversity, recruitment, and retention. Would you like to participate? The board has a budget. Each of you has a budget allocation to allow you to do that. What we have not historically done, and Dr. Allen brought this to my attention and asked me, you know, could we structure it differently for you? What we've not done is broken it out by individual budgets. There's a budgeted amount total for the board with specific line items that you approve each year in the overall budget approval process. And so it's easier for us to then do this carve out and show you what you have. And in any given year, if someone underutilizes their travel allocation or their current allocation, but someone else has utilized theirs and there's something else important or urgent that they need to attend, I'll use an example. Let's assume that Dr. Allen, for some reason, attends some conferences or pays for FSBA, and so essentially his budget is depleted. But I get called to a State Board of Education meeting, an emergency meeting, and they dictate, like they have sometimes in the past, that the board chair must travel with us. I'd have to pull that out of the budget. And so for someone else who hasn't traveled, their portion of that budget would roll over to his budget line item to cover that travel during that emergency. Does that make sense? So this gets back to, we're going to work with you to clarify TDAs further, to make it a simpler process, and we're going to work with council to do that. So it's a much larger conversation. It's a great question, and hopefully I'm answering it to the extent that I possibly can without confusing you anymore. That's not my intent. The intent is for me to honor what your requests are and to honor the fact that each of you wants to pursue a different avenue for personal professional growth. I don't think that necessarily there needs to be any animosity towards a particular group. It's just, in your experience, you feel like you may not have benefited from it. That's fine. Move forward. I do think, though, to Ms. Fields' point, there are some essential trainings about cohesiveness and function of the board that the board may need to participate in, but we can pay that fee separately rather than paying a membership fee for those individuals. Hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully I've helped clarify that a bit. Ms. Miller's looking at me, so I muddied the water even further. Not my intent.
Thanks for giving us permission.
Not my intent. So,
No, it's fine. That was great.
all right. Thank you, Ms. Miller. All right, Central Florida Aviation Academy. Board members, please know we're going to take a brief recess after this because we have to load the final presentation. Unfortunately, my email did not bring over the presentation for the last topic. So CFAA, we've talked about this a few times, board members. As you know, we have a CFAA West. We have the Lakeland campus affiliated with Kathleen High School. Very successful program. All of you have heard the stories of people finding out about this program and actually relocating to Polk County just so their children can attend this. Dr. Allen, I have met that family whose child then went on to honor the United States in a competition, I believe in Poland or over in Europe, in the glider competition. He's part of our U.S. Olympic team, if I recall correctly, or aviation team. And so this is a great example, though, of a fabulous program, but due to its geographic location, becomes limiting, right? So certain people or certain students, while they had equal access to the program, the true barrier to them was the distance from where they live, right? So if you live in the northeast portion of Polk or you live in Frostproof, Fort Meade area, getting to CFAA each day could be incredibly burdensome for a family and for a child, which ultimately may have led to a decision for that student not to participate. We then turned around and expanded the program to the Winter Haven campus in partnership with the Winter Haven City Council and in partnership with the airport. That program has flourished without in any way, and I know that we had some initial concerns, because there always are when you do program expansion or replication, is this in any way going to hurt the enrollment at the original campus? It did not. In fact, this campus is flourishing, much like our other, is at or above capacity, has a waiting list. Those students, and again, thanks to the partnership with Sun and Fun, and thank you to the partnership with the city and various partners, we were able to establish a small satellite campus there on the Winter Haven Airport location. But that campus has now grown significantly, as I shared, and there are now some limitations that we have faced for that program and its continued improvement. So Sun and Fun has approached us again, and they have indicated that the donor who paid for the initial building at Lakeland has an interest in replicating that approach here. That is a lease program with us. It was the first lease, if I recall correctly, that we structured in that manner. I'll go through some of the lease terms here in a moment for you if you hadn't had a chance to look at this. But essentially what we're looking to do is grow this program and replicate the same facility at the Winter Haven campus. I had a meeting recently with T. Michaels with the city of Winter Haven to ensure that the city was on board with this and that any concerns that they had been rectified and remedied. The only issue to be determined is once the board and Sun and Fun reach a tentative agreement, then they will make sure that they secure all of the FAA stipulations and contracts with them as far as this property is concerned and its construction. Under the initial terms of the agreement, and this is when this was first signed, in going back many years ago, the rent is actually kind of fluid because it's determined, the fees we pay them are determined based off CPI and some other factors as the terms or the timeline of the contract proceeds. So during the initial years, the base rent was either $7.50 per square foot or the enrollment times $1,300, which was a portion of of the FTE allocation. So the initial base rent costs were $435,000, and then student enrollment came to $520,000. And so obviously, I believe at the time we had the option to pay the lesser of the two, and so I believe we paid the $435,000. The contract terms, though, stipulate that there are 5-year renewals available for up to a 25-year lease. During the first renewal, it does stipulate how the terms change. So the base rent remains the same for the first 5 years, but afterwards it adjusts to reflect the 3-year CPI as published. Student enrollment remains the same for the first 3 years. Afterwards, it adjusts by dividing the $1,300 by the current state funding rate. This number is then multiplied by the state rate. I have taken the contract. You have a copy of the contract. This is the second time I've provided it for you. I would urge you to make sure you read through it. It is not an easy contract to read in certain areas, so I have asked council to provide their oversight of this, because if we move forward with a new proposal, there are terms and conditions within the initial contract that we may want to address differently, including the fee structure and reimbursements and some other guarantees that are in there. As I mentioned, there's no question that the program garners a lot of interest. It's high demand. We've got amazing teachers there. We did, again, expand it to Winter Haven to provide greater access, much to the benefit of the east side of the county. They are operating out of portables. The request at this time from Sun and Fun is based off their interest in building a similar site that on the Winter Haven Airport site, they have asked for the school board to potentially commit. There's no requirement for this, but they've asked if the school board would be willing to commit anywhere from $3 to $5 million to assist with infrastructure. And I have provided you with the maps in the past, but I'll attach those again for you to make sure that you can review those. Based off its location, there is a roadway that would have to be extended to reach the campus. There's some additional infrastructure costs that are there. These are estimated costs. I've given you an estimate. I believe we attached the estimated costs, and I think actually you may have had attached the aerial view of the placement for the facility as well in the documents I provided you prior to this meeting. If not, I'll be sure to provide those again. But these are estimated costs. The number could come in less than $3 million. It could come in slightly over $3 million. So I just want to make sure that we're showing our good faith in bringing this forward to you to give you time to contemplate. Again, there's no vote right now. I can't really ask you for a vote until we get to those figures that they have come up with, get a little bit more refined, a little bit more accurate. And again, I'd like to spend more time with Mr. Murphy and his team to make sure that the contract will reflect our interests and values and needs, and then bring that contract to you so you can review it and see any potential changes between the original contract and a new contract. And I don't see necessarily any glaring large, significant changes, but there is language cleanup. It is a very convoluted contract at times to try and interpret. So I'd like to get that cleaned up so that there's no question as to if the school district honors its commitments, when do we take ownership of the facility? What are the terms and conditions if we walk away from the facility due to any unforeseen issues? I mean, what happens if Winter Haven decides they're going to be the next Lakeland airport where it's going to expand for commercial flights, and now the runway or this building is in the middle of a new runway that it has to be relocated. There's all these conditions, and I want to make sure we get our FAA certifications and commitments letters in as well. So there's a great opportunity for us here with this project, and it's been an amazing partnership to date, so I don't anticipate anything. But again, I think we have to do our due diligence and make sure that if I bring something to the board as far as a contract, that you feel comfortable with its terms and conditions. Dr. Allen.
Thanks, Superintendent, and thanks for resharing that contract. And, you know, obviously we had CFAA in the boardroom last go-round last month to hear the great things happening there. So definitely a believer in the program, and more than likely would support the expansion this way. I don't know. I think for clarity, I would like to maybe hear from Mr. Murphy. I was trying to understand and read the language in that contract as well. So I see 2036 is when that 25-year lease expires. And then it says in order to take ownership, we have to then go into another 5-year lease. So my question is, when that extends, like when that ends, right, we wrap up at 2036, you go into that 5-year lease. After that, in year one, are we taking ownership of the building? I think that's where I was wanting to have clarity. And then secondly, I think in 2020 when I came on the board, I really appreciated in the budget book, it noted what our lease cost was annually. And I think you put the numbers there, Superintendent, because I think it's approximately $1 million per year is what we were paying in that lease. Be nice if that was still in the budget book. I'd like to see that as well. But just a couple questions for clarification.
I've taken those down, but I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're asking. You want clarification on the ownership of the building after the initial 2036, during that term of the subsequent 5 years.
Yeah, because the language says that when the lease expires at 2036, we are required to go into another 5-year lease term. And at that point, then we can take ownership of the building, is how I read the contract. So then I'm asking, it does seem a little muddy. Like, does it mean like in year one of that 5-year term after 2036, the building is then ours at this point?
Gotcha. Okay. I understand. Was there a second question? The cost?
The second question was just more a comment for staff, as it relates to the budget book. Please include that still in the budget book. I know in 2020 it was there, and then I always looked for it thereafter, never saw it, but to be able to see what that lease cost was per year.
Thank you.
Mr. Keys?
I want to thank you, Superintendent, for providing sort of a granular cost. That always interests me coming from the finance side. And I'll state that I'm looking forward to seeing everything involved and going on in the development of that. But I will go on record saying that I'm really not in favor of supporting any kind of developmental costs as it be permanent to the structure of the airport. We talked about extending roads. I don't really see the benefit of the district to take on any kind of cost of that, and as being stewards of the taxpayers' money. If the airport is going to benefit long-term and maybe in the facility, we will own that, but the developmental cost of the airport itself is different, I think, in part from the structure of the building that we would occupy.
Yes, sir. Ms. Fields.
Under the history, Dr. Allen, it talks about the lease terms going through June of 2036. And at the end of that period, the district would then assume ownership of the property. I think it just needs to be clarified by way of contract, because it's been a long time since this was done. And as Mr. Hyde's referenced, the contract was very detailed and very lengthy. So I think that we need to make sure that we get an understanding of that, because it's my understanding at the end of 2036 that we do assume ownership of the property, if my memory serves me correctly. And then the other question that I have, Superintendent Hyde, is you referenced that the owner was going to be investing some money for this project. The owner is deceased, so is that the owner's family that's going to be?
Yeah, I apologize if I said owner. I thought I should have said donor. So I was told that they had a party come forward that would make a similar donation. I assumed it was the same party, so I apologize if that's not the case. I believe that's what I was told, but I could be wrong.
Okay, no problem. I just wanted to make sure.
Yes, ma'am.
And just for the history of the whole project, Dr. Gail McKenzie is the superintendent that was here at that time, and she's no longer with us. She's now with the Lord. And another person, excuse me, that was very instrumental and impactful with this project is Rick Garcia. I'm sure many of you all know Rick, and this is his baby. So if there's any history that or any knowledge that could benefit us as we get ready to pursue this project, I would encourage Superintendent Hyde and your team to talk to Rick Garcia, because he might be a very valuable asset, especially as it relates to that question about the ownership. He would definitely know what was the intent.
Thank you, Ms. Fields. And again, the interest here is to keep the conversation evolving. I want to show a good faith effort to Sun and Fun that we're progressing on this topic. I'll work with them to get some additional information. We'll work to address some of the board's concerns and interests here as well. And so I'll do it the best I can. It's just having read through that contract multiple times, I think there's a lot of language cleanup for clarity purposes, because to Ms. Fields' point and Dr. Allen's point, there are places where it says the building transfers over, and then there are conditions for another 5-year extension on the lease, and it just, if the building transitions to us, why would we be paying a lease price? Now, what I believe is intended there is that part of the lease payback is not only to basically offset the cost from the donor, but it's also to help pay for flight hours and other things that Sun and Fun provides for our students who are in the pilots program towards their certifications. But if that's the case, it needs to be restated. It's no longer a lease, it's a programmatic fee. So again, I don't want the two topics to become conflated with each other, because it's too easy right now. And I think there's just a little bit of ambiguity in there that we can help clarify. Because if I have questions, you as board members have read it and have questions. I know when I first sent it to Drew and Mr. Murphy's office, we had some initial conversations about, all of us had questions, so we're just drilling down into it. But to Ms. Fields' point, I know Mr. Garcia very well. We're friends, and so we will be certain to bring him and his team to the table and not try and do this in isolation, because we want to hear their perspective on it as well. But I'd like to bring that back before you with some updates. So, Ms. Fields.
Also, if my memory serves me correctly, Mr. Bridges was the attorney at the time. So Mr. Bridges would probably have knowledge as well.
Yes.
Board members, it is 10:28. We're gonna round it up to 10:30. We're gonna take a brief recess, 10-15 minutes. We'll be back here at 10:45. This way I can get the final presentation loaded, and then we can go through the last topic before we go into a closed session. Thank you for your attention this morning, and good to see everybody. Good to see you, Mr. Nolte.
All right, board members, this meeting is adjourned. On recess. All right, board members, thanks for being back in a timely manner. I appreciate the little break that we had and look forward to wrapping up our time. Superintendent, could you lead us through the rest of our work session here?
Yes, sir. The last item, bringing back to the board, is on tax referendums. The board may recall we talked about this a little while ago. There are two types of referendums that the board has available to it. One is an additional millage rate that we could go out for directly. The second one is a sales tax referendum. Additional millage, again, for background information, I gave you a lot of what you had seen previously, just in a different format. So in this case, the most important part would be bullet number 3. Based off this year's growth taxable value, a 1 mil referendum would generate approximately $72.5 million to be shared by the district and charter schools. The estimated charter school portion would be $11.7 million, leaving $60.7 million to be expended by the district. A mil is 1/10 of 1 cent. 1 mil levy is approximately $1 for every $1,000 of assessed property value. So if your home's assessed value is $150,000, your tax would be an additional $150. Revenue from the millage, based off this year's gross taxable value, a 1 mil referendum would generate approximately, I don't know why that, sorry, referendum summary. With one exception, Florida voters showed strong support for local referenda in yesterday's election, passing measures to increase funding for public education across multiple counties. This is provided by FEN. Voters supported additional funding for schools, especially for teacher salaries and retention, school safety and security improvements, and enhanced programs. The local referenda enjoyed broad community support, bipartisan backing, and business community support. The following school districts listed below were successful in passing a traditional millage rate increase, a new traditional millage rate increase for the purpose of supporting salaries. St. John's, Pinellas, Hillsborough, and Franklin counties. Please note that when I state here that they support salaries, many of these counties, and I have a handout for each board member, actually many of these counties set aside a portion of the referendum to provide support for specialized programs such as career tech ed, workforce development, fine and performing arts, athletics, and other areas including technology and or even content instructional area supports. Referendums, as I just stated, will support more than just salaries. Referendum that we have found in the research that we conducted with assistance from FEN, thank you to our staff, we found that there's a set-aside within the referendum to provide supports for fine and performing arts, athletics, technology, career tech ed, workforce development, school safety and security, and special education. A county sales tax referendum is a shared revenue referendum. Many of our surrounding counties have these. Osceola has one. Hillsborough County has one. The greatest advantage to these types of referendums is the term, right? You get a 15-year, much like our half-penny sales tax for capital outlay. You get a 15-year commitment. The drawback is, at times, and we've seen this happen in other counties, the county can actually adjust the percentage that the school district receives. I'm not quite sure, and I'd have to work with council to get you some additional answers as it relates to whether or not that can be a fixed agreement that's stipulated somehow contractually or stated within the referendum, so that when voters vote for that, there's an understanding by all parties that it cannot change. But again, it has to be initiated by the county commissioners and municipalities, must be approved by the majority vote of electors in our county. Projects may be construction improvements in land. Proceeds cannot be used for operations. However, there is a provision that exists that allows these funds to be spent on operations if approved by the voters. So you can run a simultaneous or concurrent referendum allowing these dollars to be converted to operational dollars. In our case, that would be beneficial. However, some of you, as all of you know, there are capital expenditures right now that cover salaries. Many of our maintenance and facilities team members are fully funded from our capital dollars, and so those dollars could come back out, and so there's an offsetting that could take place there as well. Shared revenue between the county and school district does vary. The county, in some counties, takes as much as little as 60%, up to 70%, and the district can receive 30 to 40%. Again, the advantages from my perspective is the duration of the proposal, plus in partnership with our county, there are some similar needs that we have. The county may definitely want to look again at a referendum opportunity, as they did initiated last year. If you recall, Commissioner Lindsay brought forward a proposal to help address infrastructure, and considering the sidewalk gap analysis and a lot of safety issues that exist in our county, I do believe that there is a shared interest there moving forward. Revenue from a sales tax, currently it generates approximately $78 million. The county's portion would be $47 million. The district's portion would be $31 million. Again, however, it persists for 15 years rather than having to go back out for a referendum every 4. And so I gave you a short table here to allow you to see some additional information as it relates to sales tax versus millage. This is not reflective of the county involvement or the shared revenue from those, because there is a difference between the two. As I mentioned before, $31 million comparatively to $60 million that our district could set aside. The goal for today is, again, to bring the referendum topic before the board, determine what additional questions that you may have. At the next workshop, I will provide you with a timeline and the process that has to be adhered to in order for the board to consider, publicly advertise for a public hearing, and then subsequently hold a vote, at which point, if the vote is upheld, to go forward and request the referendum be placed on the ballot. I'll provide you with the directions or the steps that we will take to notify the elections office to ensure that that takes place in a timely manner. But there is a clock to this, and I'll also outline for you what the district can do as far as support for referendum. We may not fund any initiatives or aspects of a referendum. We can't speak to it. We can hold community town halls. We can provide information to many of our community partners, but the district cannot create a PAC by itself. That's left to other agencies and organizations. To my knowledge, we do not have in existence any survey data based off any stakeholder group, whether that be employees or community members, that's basically negates an interest in a referendum, nor does it clearly support. There was a survey that was conducted, I want to say about 4 or 5, maybe 6 months ago, but there were only 250 some odd respondents. In that survey, though, 80% favorability for a referendum at this time. Interesting enough, when you break it down along political affiliation, there was a stronger support for a tax referendum for teacher salaries amongst Republicans than there was for Democrats. Board members may recall, I'll conclude with this and open up any questions or comments you may have. Board members may recall that Hillsborough County found themselves in a legal battle with their county commissioner's office. The county commissioners initially rejected Hillsborough County's request to place this on the ballot. That legal challenge was resolved, which clears the path for districts like ours moving forward, that should that become a point of contention, there is a case law that we can point to now that would prevent that from taking place. So board members, I'll open up to any questions or comments that you may have specific to the referendum. And Ms. Fields, I don't know if this is a holdover or if you're first to speak. Was this from last time? Okay. I'm not putting you on the spot.
Thank you, Superintendent Hyde. You and I have had many conversations about this topic, and I am very much in support of us pursuing it and making the necessary arrangements with the PEA group, because I know that they have resources that they can help us with. I think my question is, as you referenced, there's just so much that we can do as a body, and I think that we would definitely need to know what that looks like, and then maybe even get a feel from what the county officials are saying. I think that's going to be important. I know that, as you referenced, Hillsborough had some issues coming from the state, and I don't know if that would be anything that we would have to be concerned with, but I think at the end of the day, we know that we need the additional resources in order to make sure that we are able to pay our staff what they deserve to have, and this is probably going to be the only way that we're going to be able to do it, in my opinion. So I think that we have to do the work, make sure that we vet everything, and then bring the information before the board with whatever questions the board members might have, and then move forward. That's my take on it.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Keys.
Thank you, Superintendent. I will tell you that I am excited to explore all options, and I think that the chance to do a deep dive into the budget excites me, and to see where we have potentially room and how we go about that. But if one of these things is going out to seek out, whether it be a sales tax referendum or a millage referendum, to gather these funds. I think we do need to do everything that we can to provide the support to our educational staff and our teachers, and if we have to think outside of the box to do those things, which then we haven't looked at before, I would tell you that in the past I hadn't been supportive of, but I'm very interested to see how that looks as a big picture. And I'm also excited to, partner with our partners at the county and say, hey, what are their thoughts on it? Because ultimately, if we go the sales tax way, we would need their support. Where I'm not typically a fan of having somebody else in control of something we put our first foot forward on, we do need to have those conversations. So I'm excited to get as much information as possible and chew on that information, and just looking forward to seeing that. So thank you.
Yeah, and if I may clarify, we already did the deep dive on our budget. If you recall, you were partner on that committee. The school district was very fortunate to have had an outside partner sponsor an organization to come in and do a significant financial audit on our expenditures and the manner in which we budget accordingly. That committee, I was the only district representative on the committee. Staff provided resources and information, but I was the only standing committee member from the school district. 35 other community leaders were engaged in this process so that there would be some trust on the outcomes, right? Because it's easy for the district to provide, to conduct its own internal audit and then say, oh, everything looks great, right? And then people don't trust you because, well, if you did your own audit, you're guarding your own hen house, right? Is the argument. So at this point, what did come out of that audit were several things, several findings. Number one, we've done an incredible job at maintaining our borrowing power. We're one of the few districts that are as well positioned as we are to borrow money in the event for capital expenditures or other emergency needs, and which allows us to maintain a positive credit rating and also allows us to be more competitive with interest rates if we do or when we borrow money. Second thing that they pointed out was that in this climate of the manner in which schools are actually funded, that additional revenue would have to be a consideration for the school board moving forward, or school district, moving forward to consider potential revenue sources, of which a referendum becomes an offsetting revenue source for us. Because within our current funding mechanism, there is not enough money to address our various needs as a school district adequately. I know of late, Ms. Miller and I, and I've had this conversation with others, Dr. Allen and a handful of you, about concerns at the federal level about potential for freezes or funding to be pulled or reallocated at this time. I think we've seen federal judges intercede and prevent certain things. We did not see any significant freezes or impact here. The VPK funding was held up for less than half a day. Do I think that we'll see ultimately a restructuring of federal allocations and federal programs? I think you will, in an effort for the president and others to meet the expectation that they somehow find savings within that. But I dare say that if you try and take money away from IDEA or Title I, you're going to have a march on Washington unlike anything that's ever been seen. And that's just an honest response. You are not going to take money away from our most fragile kids and not have parents and communities stand up and say enough's enough. But we're not adequately funded, and I think the district continues to show a pattern of trying to do the best we can with the resources we have within certain constraints. So I did want to clarify, though, that we did that deep dive. Now, what I believe you're referring to is something that you and Chairman Dr. Allen have spoken to me about forming that committee, because if the board votes for a referendum, regardless of whether or not the board votes for a referendum, there's an interest in having a financial committee that maintains some monitoring of our expenditures on an annual basis, on an ongoing basis, to ensure that we're following and meeting our fiduciary responsibilities. And that's important, right? If anything's come out, it's maintaining how do you build trust, and it's through transparency. So that would help us with that a great deal. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to that and clarify that a bit, and share, again, remind everybody of the outcomes from that audit we did a little over 2 years ago. And we're very pleased. And the reason we brought the 35 community members from their respective groups was each of them was an expert or a leader within a certain area. And what we wanted to do was open it up to say, if we're not approaching how we budget or problem solve the right way, because maybe we have a myopic view of it because we're educators, this is how we've always done it, but someone in the business world can lend their knowledge, or someone from the county level or the city commission level can lend their knowledge and expertise and say, hey, have you thought about this? That was the intent of the committee, was to, again, to create transparency, but also see if there were other suggestions and ideas that came out of those conversations. And I think they were very fruitful. So thank you for the opportunity to clarify that again.
Well, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the clarification. I was familiar with the previous analyzation of the budget and the deep dive we did. I'm looking forward to having that continue, and I appreciate you for committing to putting those resources forward to kind of guide us in the direction to keep doing that, because of course transparency is of the utmost importance, and I think subject matter experts in that and getting the community involved, such as we've seen on the other committees throughout the county, is vitally important. So I appreciate your support on that.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sharpless.
Thank you, Superintendent. My question or comment really is, when you go back down to the last slide, you know, really two options that was presented here for us to discuss. We already have a half-cent sales tax, as you mentioned, which has done great things for our county. I've been at some of the ribbon cuttings where we've talked about that. But really, where a majority of our budget needs are right now is in the operating budget, specifically for salaries. So I think I would, with the fact that sales tax, there might be a little bit that you can, use for salaries. Really, millage is the route if you wanted to hit our operation budget, and you've clearly stated that in this. So to me, that would be the need if we were going to go that route, and I would certainly encourage us to go more the millage route than the sales tax, because, as we all know, salaries are the biggest concern right now. We just had another round of bargaining last week based on salaries. Was a big contentious point, and we're going to have a closed session after this talking about bargaining. And the only thing I'll say in public, we'll talk more in the closed session, is I was disappointed in the results last week overall and frustrated. So I look forward to having that conversation here in a little bit in closed session. But millage, to me, looks like the way you have to go.
Okay. Ms. Miller?
I just want to I think we should be mindful of how this has been done in other districts. And Superintendent High gets tired of me saying this word, but messaging. We don't message well here at the district. I think in education in general, we struggle to do that. We talk to within ourselves and to ourselves. But to make this happen, and you can see that now, we even have a problem communicating that with ourselves when I have, staff that have no idea that we've done the work we've done already to show that we are good stewards of the dollar and provided those results. And we're going to have to convince ourselves what we're doing and then message to the public and look at, we have to correct misinformation about how the dollars are spent here. Not doing so will shoot us in the foot with a referendum. And if we do that to ourselves, it's our own fault. So I think it's all going to be about messaging. I can't remember where I invited myself into one of your meetings with all of those people. I was at a school, and I think they were touring at the time. But I can tell you the people that look through our budget, I was pleasantly surprised at who was chosen, the diverse group that was there, the people outside of education that were there, the true business leaders of this district, because this cannot be done by schools alone. It cannot be a partisan issue. You can see the success of the previous district's referendums. It was not done on a party line basis, because our schools, no matter where you are in this district, or choices that you make in education, it matters what your public schools are producing. The students that come out matter, whether you are a retired person and talking about paying that tax, or if your children are currently in school or previously in school. It's going to be about marketing and messaging. We have got to do that we have to look at it outside of education with messaging. I think it would do whatever is decided by the board. I think it would do us good to have a conversation about a actual campaign that's planned out, so we can schedule how this will be messaged to make it the most effective. This will fall on an election year for some of, I think, your greatest board member right here next to you, Superintendent. And so we need to talk about how we can partner to send that message out. at a time when we're going to have to get people to turn out to the polls to support our public schools. So that's my biggest concern.
Ms. Wyatt?
Thank you. I would echo a little bit of what Lisa said, just the caliber of those that were served on the efficiency audit committee. I was very pleasantly surprised, and when they approach you in public and say, man, we really thought we were going to find a lot of fat, and there really isn't much. And to be completely honest, we're impressed with how you're doing what you're doing. I know, especially as we're looking at rezoning, transporting kids was one of the biggest things I think their takeaway is how far we go on a daily basis, 2.5 times around the world, and the cost associated with doing that isn't covered wholly by the state. I'm excited to explore all of these opportunities. I liked that, Mr. Keese. That I think that this is, an opportunity. I think many of us on the campaign trail will say we're not going to force a tax on anyone, but we're hearing from our community that they want us to do more for our teachers and for our staff. And so I would love to give them the opportunity to put their money where their mouth is and vote in support of helping us raise those additional dollars. But I do think it comes down to messaging and making sure that we are correcting misinformation out there, because there is a lot of misinformation going around right now, that we're truly making sure that we understand where the dollars are and that we're communicating that well, both internally and externally.
Yes, ma'am. Seeing no further questions or comments, thank you all very much for your time. So remember, next workshop, you'll get additional updates as far as the process, procedures, timelines, and any requirements, and I'll work closely with Mr. Murphy and staff to get that to you in a timely manner, but that will be on the workshop. The board may need to, and I'll discuss this with Mr. Murphy, the board may need to take some form of vote that evening to provide me with some explicit direction. But again, I need to clarify that with Mr. Murphy. That does not necessarily mean the board will be voting on affirmative of a referendum, but they may be voting to give me explicit direction on certain next steps. So, but again, having not done this in a long time here in Polk County, other than the half-penny sales tax, I want to make sure we dot all our i's, cross our t's, we don't end up with some type of challenge as a result. So, Mr. Chair. Oh, Dr. Allen?
Curious, how many county commissioners have you reached out to as it relates to the half-cent sales tax? And then any city commissioners in regards to that referendum? Just wondering, you don't have to give me an answer right now, but it would be nice to know what kind of feedback you've received.
Certainly. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that concludes the workshop with the exception of a closed session. I did not see have anybody request any items under new business or old business. There's nothing under budget and staffing or information items, sir.
Very good. Thank you, Superintendent. Board members, we're going to now go down to the board member comments before we move into our closed session. Mr. Sharp.
I just want to real quick mention that junior achievement needs volunteers for the 3DE program. So there's multiple days. I'm not going to go through all that right here, but make sure to reach out to Shauna Dykes if you're interested in serving as a coach or a judge for any of the 3DE trainings at either Tenor Rock or Lake Region. Thank you.
I did share with you the timeline and where we're at as it relates to our general counsel search. So you can see I did note to Superintendent that we're going to have that 90-minute session with SGR during our next work session. And you can see that we've got a pretty good, strong candidate pool. As Mr. Thomas noted, he basically said he's very pleased with the quality of the applicants that we have. So far, we have 9 applicants. And you can see also in the timeline that it extends to February 16th is when the posting closes out. So if you have any other questions or anything like that, I can direct towards Mr. Thomas. Let me know. But if not, we'll see him here in the boardroom during our next work session. All right. Ms. Wyatt, you're recognized.
Thank you, and thank you for providing his email. I noticed at the bottom it said he'll let you know if he thinks they're going to need to keep the position open for a bit longer. I would hope that we continue to have that meeting on our agenda on the 25th, because if we keep it open longer, it's going to totally throw off our entire timeline. So I do hope that we continue to keep it. It looks like there's already a decent candidate pool, more than we have had previously. So I would hope that we intend to keep it at that 16th date. I also just want to confirm, I know we spoke with him about this when he was here, but that board members will receive all of the information for the meeting on the 25th, no later than the 21st.
Okay.
That way we have time to review that weekend beforehand. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wyatt. Any other comments? All right. Very good. If we have no other business, I would like to adjourn and move into our closed session if it's time. All right. And this meeting is now adjourned.